Um, Thank you. In today's information session, we're going to have four major parts to today's meeting. We're going to tell you a little bit about ArtsFairfax and about some of the grants that we offer. We'll also look at an overview of the entire FY27 grant cycle, basically from what's going to happen today until all the way through awards are announced and reporting. Then we're going to take a deeper dive into some of the specifics around eligibility and the application evaluation, and then we'll finish up with some tips from panelists and grant staff and plenty of time for Q&A at the end, as well as throughout this information session. One thing to know is that the application is currently open and the guidelines and the application questions are available on our website if you'd like to grab that information and follow along with this presentation or to refer to it later. With us today, we've got Kelly and myself, but I did want to show you our kind of whole ArtsFairfax team. Some folks you may have met before, some people you may have not engaged with. For example, you might know Shannon Smith if you're an applicant to our Capital One Hall Community Partnership. But today, the info session is going to be led by myself. My name is Nicole Pallison. I'm the grants manager for ArtsFairfax. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a white woman in my 30s, wearing glasses with brown hair in a bun, and I have a white collared shirt underneath a teal sweater. Today, I'm joined by Kelly Choi. I'll let her introduce herself.
Thanks, Nicole. My name is Kelly Choi. I'm the Director of Grants and Community Partnerships for ArtsFairfax. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white middle-aged woman and I'm wearing a gray sweater today. So thank you for joining us, and I'll turn it back to Nicole.
Thanks. So let's see. Going to tell you a little bit now about ArtsFairfax, especially if you're new to our grants program or just kind of getting to learn more about what we do. ArtsFairfax is the designated local arts agency for Fairfax County, and so our mission is dedicated to expanding support and access to arts and cultural opportunities for all of Fairfax County. We do this by supporting arts organizations and also connecting members of our community to these arts organizations. But for you, as an applicant who is be an arts organization within the community, there are services and opportunities that you can take advantage of, whether or not you're a grantee. So these include free resources like our arts directory, our events calendar, our artist calls, and our job board. These are resources that your organization can use to share information about upcoming performances, events, or opportunities with the broader ArtsFairfax audience. So these are resources that you have access to whether or not you're a grant applicant. So keep a bookmark in those for later. Uh, One thing I wanted to point out too, if you haven't already subscribed to our newsletters, highly recommend that. This is where you can find information about not just our grants, but also artist calls, job postings, professional development opportunities, social and networking events from Fairfax County, from ArtsFairfax, but also throughout the DMV. I also encourage you to engage with our social media, tag us in posts on Instagram and things like that, and we'll do our best to reshare your information. If things are showing up on the arts calendar and tagged on social media, you might find us featuring you in our Instagram stories, or you might show up in our Things to Do newsletter. Another thing while I'm talking about newsletters and online resources, if you're a returning or a regular applicant, while you're getting ready for your FY27 operating support application, I'd encourage you to take a moment to confirm that your organization is listed in the arts directory. When we revamped our website, that's another thing I'll show you too. When we revamped our website in May, around that time, the arts directory was essentially reset. So if maybe you remember creating an arts directory entry like 2 or 3 years ago, that one may not have made it over into the new arts directory. So take a moment to confirm that your information is there and that it's up to date. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to get started talking about grants. But one of the first things that I want to do, especially if there's anyone who's like in that moment of like, I'm not sure if this grant is right for me, I'm not sure if I'm eligible. So I'm going to go over some basic grant eligibility and things about our grant program so that you can know right now in the first few minutes of this meeting whether or not this grant is right for you. In order to be eligible for ArtsFairfax grants, and especially the operating support grant, Your organization must be a nonprofit organization that has a core mission in an arts discipline, whether that's performing, exhibiting, or educating. If you're maybe a new organization, you haven't fully established your 501(c)(3) status, you are able to apply with a fiscal sponsor, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Your organization also does need to be based in Fairfax County, the city of Fairfax, or the city of Falls Church. There are a number of ways that we determine that within the application, and so I'll talk about that more later, but your organization does need to be here in Fairfax County and serve primarily Fairfax County residents. You also need to have had at least $5,000 in eligible expenses in a previous fiscal year to be eligible for operating support. Some examples of organizations that are not eligible, even if they are based here in Fairfax County, City of Fairfax, or City of Falls Church, would be arts divisions or programs within a larger 501(c)(3). Those arts divisions may be eligible for project support or ticket subsidy, but not for operating support. You're also not eligible for operating support if you receive line item funding from Fairfax County or from the Commonwealth of Virginia, if your organization is a department of George Mason University or a nonprofit or organization that supports county agencies. This would be like PTA organizations, different booster organization, Friends of the Library. If your organization's entire mission is to support or serve one of these county agencies, you're not eligible for operating support funding. Also, at this time, we do not have grants for individual artists. Um, One of the things that we are looking to offer eventually, maybe in the future, would be support financially, like operating support for individual artists, but at this time, we don't have that. So make sure you watch our artist call page if you're an individual artist. Subscribe to our newsletters because we're frequently put out not only artist opportunities within Fairfax County, but also in the DMV. So if you live in this area, other opportunities that are around you. And you're going to hear me say this a lot, but if you have any questions about eligibility, about any of the materials or things that you see today, how does this line up with your organization? Please ask me or Kelly before you get started on your grant. This is something we're going to try and help and assist with. So before you get too deep into an application, if you have questions about basic or high level stuff like, is my organization eligible? Reach out to us and have a one-on-one conversation, and we'll help you navigate that. Okay. Today, we're focusing on operating support, but this is part of a constellation of grants that ArtsFairfax offers. We offer a ticket and participation subsidy grant. That one's actually just closed now for fiscal year 26. It'll reopen for fiscal 27 in August of 2026. But this is a grant that would help your organization offer free or discounted tickets or assist with transportation fees in order to help underserved audience members in our county access your program when they would not normally be able to do that. Another grant that we offer is project support grant. So again, sign up for those newsletters and watch our space because in a few months we'll have an information session on that grant. And the project support grant is to help you try new things or expand or grow your operations, launch a project that reaches new audiences, to do something out of the ordinary. But today's topic is operating support, the reason we're all here. And these are funds that help support your nonprofit arts organization's day-to-day operations. People focus a lot on operating support and project support applications. And to be fair, this is because both of these applications are quite complex. They take a lot of time to gather the materials, to write the information, to go through the whole grant application process. So a lot of organizations will come to me and they'll ask, which one should I apply for? If your organization has limits on the amount of staff or volunteer time that it can devote to grants, you might find yourself having to decide, do I apply for operating or project support? And so we wanted to give you a little window into the funding acceptance rate from the most recent grant cycle of FY26 so that you can understand which application might be the best fit for your organization. In operating support, all eligible organizations receive at least a minimum grant award. So all eligible applications receive some sort of funding. In the operating support grant, your maximum award request is a percentage of your eligible expenses from the previous fiscal year. So what this means is with all eligible applications being funded, at least in part, is that application or applicants or grantees received between 5 and 87% of the funds that they requested. My tip for operating support, when you step through the application and you go through the table that compares your eligible expenses to your award amount, is always request your maximum eligible amount in this part of the application. When it comes to project support, this is an application that's really competitive. Your request is tied to the expenses that are outlined in the project budget with a cap of $25,000. But in the most recent round of project support, only 43% of the eligible applications were funded. And of those 43%, those grantees received between 50 and 70% of their award request. So aside from that 43%, the applicants to this fund who were not funded received no support at all in project support. Uh, so that's kind of a bit of an overview of like, it gets to those questions of, is this grant a good fit for my organization? Am I eligible? And so this is a moment where I kind of wanted to stop, to pause, to see if I could answer any questions about the initial eligibility. I am going to go into more detail about how it's determined later. But if anyone has any questions for us now, I put a pause in for a few minutes. Feel free to type things in the chat, unmute yourself, raise your hand using the Zoom thing. We'll engage with you.
Could you just
And
briefly,
I'm gonna
oh,
add one clarifying
Oh,
point to what Nicole kind of shared, and then we'll go to the question. I'm sorry. The 100% acceptance rate, that is an actual rate of last year. I would not necessarily confirm that that is always going to be the acceptance rate, but that has been the last few years. And so it's generally how we try to create a funding scenario with those funds. And then I think, was it Kimberly that had a question? I'm sorry.
yeah,
yes,
just real
Kimberly.
quick. I just wanted to touch base on the eligible expenses. Could you just briefly touch on what is and what is not typically eligible expenses for last year?
Sure. When you're looking at your eligible expenses for the most recently completed fiscal year, we do have a financials table that will help you calculate some of that, but some of the things that the two kind of major points that I think of is this would be funding I'd have to set to the side when I'm trying to decide if I've got my eligible or which of my expenses are eligible. Be any in-kind expenses are not counted towards that expense amount, and also the calculation of pass-through funds. And I'll explain pass-through funds in a little bit more detail when we look closely at the guidelines, but a good example of this would be if you're an art gallery and so you're displaying a piece of art and then you sell it on behalf of the artist. So some money is going to come in, but it's going to literally pass through your organization on the way to the bulk of that funds being paid out to the artist. Your organization may take a small commission of that. So let's say I have to use round numbers because I'm not a math guru. Let's say that your organization has a painting that is $1,200 and 1,000 of that sale goes to the artist and 200 stays in your organization. Rather than showing an income of 1,200 and an expense of 1,000, where you have taken in the money and then spent to pay the artist, your organization would show simply an income of $200. So it's basically keeping the eligible expenses number from getting too inflated from money that is just passing through your organization. Kimberly, does that help clarify eligible expenses, at least for the time being?
Yes, that's
Okay.
perfect. Thank you.
I love that thumbs up. It's so active. It's fun. Any other questions about eligibility or kind of the overall funding picture that we've discussed so far? Okay. Everyone's waiting for all the good stuff, so I'm going to keep on trucking along. Before I take you onto our website and to look closer at the guidelines, for anyone who's a returning grantee, this is that moment where we talk about some of the changes that we've had from the most recent fiscal year. Not a ton, to be perfectly honest. Some of the major things that you might notice are in our organization profile. If you're a returning grant applicant, you can request to reopen and edit your previously submitted organization profile. This is how this is supposed to work. Things about your organization that don't tend to change over time, like your address or your organization's mission, are still stable and static in that application or in that organization profile. Some questions are reset, like what were your income and expenses for the previous fiscal year? That question's been reset. We did change one question in the organization profile, and that relates to your top three goals. Previously, the organization profile asked you a question, which is to describe your organization's top three goals and or summarize your strategic plan. And in about 200 to 300 words, that's a lot. And so we wanted to tighten up and focus on that question. So now this question reads simply, describe your organization's top three goals for the FY27 grant cycle. So what are the three things you're focused on for this grant period that we're looking at? You'll still have the chance to upload your strategic plan, and you can definitely refer to it when you're describing your goals or answering other parts of the application, but these two questions are not tangled together anymore. This one now just focuses on your top three goals. Another major change, and this applies specifically to our larger organizations, is our audit requirement has been revised to be in alignment with VCA because we don't want to be the only grant organization asking you to do an audit. It's a time and financial expense that we don't want to be the only ones asking for that. So now our policy is in alignment with VCA, which is that an audit is only required for organizations that have 2 consecutive years of income above $1 million. If you're unsure if you're hitting that threshold or if you have any questions about that, definitely reach out to Kelly and I, and we'll talk you through it because we know that this is a bit of a change from year over year. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my PowerPoint because I'm going to take you to our website. Like I was saying, if you only kind of visit us around operating support season, you may not have yet noticed that we did update our website. It is beautiful visually and hopefully chock full of all the information that you need readily accessible. So, how am I going to do this? I have too many windows open. Give me just a moment to arrange my space. Okay. And I'm going to share the website. I'm going to zoom in a bit or see if I can. How's the visibility on that? Can we read the website kind of okay? I see some nodding. I see some
Looks
thumbs
good on
up.
my end.
Excellent. So this is our website. Right now we're on operating support grants, which is you can get to this directly by going to the operating support grant link. I'll throw that in the chat at some point here. But you can also navigate to it from our grants main page. If you scroll down past the beautiful photos and the description of the grant program, scrolling. I made this a little too big. There we go. You'll see this operating support grant information and resources section. This is the money. This is the gold right here. In this section, you'll see little tabs at the top of these sections, almost like a Rolodex or a recipe box. And so each tab has a little chunk of information. And these tabs are basically in chronological order. When you need to know something, you're kind of just moving from left to right on your screen. So this first thing that you see here is our dates and deadlines section. This is a pretty high-level overview or high-level timeline, and I will cover in greater detail what happens in each of these steps as we go along. One thing to note here is a very crucial piece of information on the second bullet point of the timeline, which is the grant application deadline, April 7th, 2026 at 7 p.m. That is a hard deadline with no exceptions. So get that one in your calendar or subscribe to our Google Calendar, and it will be added to your own calendar immediately. But that's definitely one to have on your radar. Once applications are accepted, staff does a review for eligibility and completeness. Then we pass eligible applications onto the panelists for panel review. You can see here that's happening in this first week in June. Panels are live streamed, so you can tune in and listen to the review not only of your application, but of other applications as well. Always an illuminating experience. And then once the panels are done evaluating the different applications, the staff will create a funding scenario based on the scores and based on scores and available funds. And we pass that funding scenario onto the grants committee and then eventually the ArtsFairfax board, who make the final approval of funding. Um, Another thing to note here, once you go through the grant period, you'll find out about your grant award announcement in August 2026. And then this begins, or we'll be in the period of the FY27 grant, which goes from July 2026 through June 2027. When the fiscal year is complete, we'll ask you to complete, or when the grant period and fiscal year are complete, we ask you to do a final report, and that would be due on August 1st, 2027. Our final reports are not like VCA's. It's all in one part, it's not two parts. And so you discuss the artistic or narrative elements and the financial elements at the same time. If you are familiar at all with VCA's grants, they have it split into two parts, one where you talk about your activities, and then one that's due sometime in the last quarter of the calendar year that talks about just financials. So ours is a combined final report. Just wanted to call that out while I was looking at that. The next tab on our page is this information session. You're here. We're in the information session, but this page in about a week is going to look differently. This is where we're going to host the video of this info session so you can refer back to it as you work. You can share it with other people in your organization who are collaborating with you. So on this information session tab is where the recording of this info session is going to live in about a week. Guidelines and eligibility is a big section, and I'm going to take you through the details of the documents in here, but return to this tab often. The guidelines and eligibility are the core of what we're asking you to do. They're the instruction manual of the application. So even if you're a returning applicant, familiarize yourself with these guidelines. Make sure you do read them every year, even if you think you know pretty much what you're getting into. I find that they can be very helpful when you feel stuck. You can look at the evaluation criteria if you're not sure how to explain something. But one of the things that you should know when you're accessing this is that we do have two tiers, essentially. A small organization, so for organizations that have a budget of under $100,000, and they can request a different amount of their general operating expenses. Same thing with medium and large, which are organizations above $100,000. So this is determined by your operating expenses. I just talked about the audit, which is about your income. So that is one thing to know. Audit's determined by your organization's income. Your budget tier is determined by your organization's expenses. While each of these criteria, the small and the medium and large organizations, they share 5 global criteria, the sub-criteria, and then therefore the questions you're asked in your application do differ between the small and the medium and large. So make sure you're working in the right application, following the correct guidelines when you do refer to these documents. And we will come back to this page. I'm going to take you through eligibility and grant criteria in greater detail in a little bit. Our applications and templates page is really helpful. You see a lot of these green links for the applications. We're always trying to drive you into the application here, but this is a good resource page. What you'll find here is you can download the small and the medium and large application questions. I do want to emphasize that all the application narrative and materials must be submitted via Submittable. So clicking on this accepting applications link and directing out to our Submittable website, which I'll show you in a moment. However, you can download these questions as a Word document. This is going to facilitate you working in a shared or a cloud space rather than live and Submittable, which I always recommend. This is also where you'll find the required downloads for the application, your program and activities table, your financials table, the thing that will help you calculate what are my eligible expenses. And then also there's instructions in here for how to download your organization profile for grant applicants, because again, a complete application in operating support has 2 submissions in Submittable. One is your organization profile for grant applicants, either revised and edited and resubmitted, or a brand new one started fresh for this year. And then your completed small or medium large organization application. So two things that you have to click submit and submittable for. Scrolling back up to this now accepting applications button. Again, you see this on multiple tabs, but it goes to the same place. When I click on it, it should take me to ArtsFairfax submittable page. So when you see this, you are not on the ArtsFairfax website. If you have a log on for the calendar, that's not the same thing as what you'd use to log into submittable, but this is our submittable web page. When you scroll down, you'll see there are 3 active applications right now. The one at the bottom here is the organization profile for grant applicants. Everybody needs to complete this one. Then, depending on your organization's budget size, you'll either complete the small or the medium and large application. And you can access these through our submittable website. Let's see. I'll come back to submittable in a moment too. Oh, I've got a thing in my way. Hold on, sorry. Okay, we're back on the website. When looking at applicant resources, these are things that can, whether you're a new or returning grant applicant, things that might be helpful for you as you complete the application. You can have a look at the list of recent recipients who received FY26 funding. There's also some tips on here about how to use the online application, how to request to edit your organization profile if you've done one already, because Submittable's website is not the most intuitive for returning to an application that's already been submitted. So you can follow along with that sort of step by step, lots of screenshots so you know where to click on things. We also have a handful of exemplary answers that panelists evaluated or that staff thought like were really exemplary. So if you're kind of stuck on how to respond to a question, the small and the medium and large application sample answers are responses from previous grantees that we received permission to share. So you can see that, how did somebody do a really good job combining their financial table and then using the narrative question to explain it? That's one that people get stuck on a lot. So if you look at those sample answers, it might give you some idea about how to get that ball rolling. And then finally, just a quick overview of our award process. So what happens after you submit at that firm and unmovable deadline in April? Once your application is submitted, Kelly and I get to work right away looking at application completeness and eligibility. So in the days following your submitted application, we may contact you with additional questions or seeking additional information. But at that point, Kelly and I are looking at applications strictly for completeness and eligibility. But if we determine that there is one that is incomplete or otherwise ineligible, at that point, incomplete and ineligible applications are rejected and they do not receive panel evaluation. Once we take all those eligible applications, we pass them along to our panelists for panel review. Our panelists are all arts experts and professionals with relevant knowledge and expertise. They might have experience in developing funding or doing arts administration. They have a variety of visual, artistic, and performing art backgrounds. But if that sounds like somebody who you know and is looking for some service in the community, we're always looking for panelists. But panelists are basically people who have this relevant knowledge and expertise. They read the applications and they score them, and then they come together here at the ArtsFairfax office and they discuss their applications in person. These discussions are then virtually live streamed, so as an applicant, you can listen in on the conversation. It's not like this Zoom where you could speak up or I could see you. It is just a webinar where you can sort of watch what's happening. But we do have the opportunity for you to submit correction forms or to ask questions to the staff during your panel day. And we will let you know which day of the panel and also what more or less what time we'll issue. Like let's say your organization is being reviewed on June 2nd. Here's the list of organizations. So you can kind of estimate when is a good time to tune in. Or if there are other organizations who are interested in hearing the evaluation of their panel, you can also tune in for that as well. Staff, Kelly and I, we are here to answer technical questions for you as you prepare your application. How do I do this? Is this a good example of what X, Y, and Z? We're able to help you talk it out, especially when it comes to specifics about your organization. But Kelly and I don't play any role or involvement in evaluating the grant. If you tell me something on the phone about your organization, it needs to make its way into the application for the panelists to read as well. I can't pipe up and be like, oh, actually, they said. Anything that's important or relevant to your organization needs to go in that application because that's the only thing that the panelists are using to evaluate you. Once the evaluation is complete, panel scores have been put together in our Z-score, which allows us to sort of compare scores and panel performance across multiple days. Staff creates a funding scenario using the panel scores and the available funds that we have. We pass that scenario on to the grants committee and then eventually the ArtsFairfax board of directors who make this final funding decision based on the evaluation of the panel. Applicants may receive, and in fact are pretty likely to receive, less than the full amount that was requested in the application. So that's just something to keep in mind as you begin to build budgets for FY27, that if you're eligible for and request, say, $10,000, it's very likely that because of the demand on funds and average panel scores, that you would receive less than that full award. I'm going to take us now back to the guidelines and eligibility. This is going to be a really detail-oriented overview of the eligibility criteria and some of the guidelines. But before I move into that kind of dense and text-heavy document, now that we've looked at the whole cycle of the award from when you submit to how evaluation works, I also want to take a moment here to pause to see if anyone has any questions. I don't have the chat open, so Kelly, please flag any if there are any in there for
Nothing in the chat right now. I think we're moving along great.
Christina. Do you have a question? Or
I actually do. Hello.
hello.
Hello. You had said under applications and templates, there were two items that had to be where we had to use the submittable process, or is it a platform? I don't know what the term is. What were those two items? I missed them.
That's okay. So there's two parts to every application. Everyone needs to complete the organization profile for grant applicants. And then either the small or the medium large application. And that small or medium large designation is based on your organization's budget level. So when you when you click on that now accepting applications button, take us back over here to submittable. It looks like, so we're on our submittable page. I guess we call this a grant management platform or something like that. You scroll down, you see there's three things you could click submit on. FY27 operating support for small, for medium large, and organization profile. So you need the org profile for sure, and then either small or medium and large, depending on your budget size. So those are the two things that have to go into submittable.
Now, can work be done in Word first and then paste it into this, or does work have
Yes.
to be on
I
this?
highly recommend doing it that way.
Very good. Okay.
I'll talk a little bit more about the Submittable has collaborators, which let you have multiple independent accounts contribute things. Like, let's say your finance officer has all of those documents, like the 990, whatever. Instead of pinging them around email in your organization, maybe you just give them collaborator access and they can pop the documents in there themselves. However, this gets sticky if you're working close to the deadline and multiple people have submittable open and they're all working in it, you can overwrite each other. It is not a truly live collaborative environment the way that you may have experienced if you work on a Microsoft Word document shared on the cloud or in Google Drive and Google Docs. Like, you can see the little like pips of anyone who's working and you don't tend to type over each other so much. That will happen in submittable. If I'm working on question number 1 and my box for question number 2 is blank and I'm typing away and I'm like, cool, I'm done, save. If someone was working on question number 2, it's gone now because my version of it overwrote it. So we'll talk more tips about submittable later, but that's one of the reasons why we do provide the Word documents of the questions for the organization profile and the application for operating support, because not only does it help you create your own record that you can keep on and collaborate and you don't have to go until you're ready. It also prevents some of those nightmare scenarios where work you have already completed may become erased. So highly recommend downloading these Word templates on our applications and templates tab. It's a good resource to have.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much. That's great. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions before we dive into eligibility and guidelines? All right, let's go. I'm always driving people back to this document. The guidelines of the grant are, it is the one thing that we share all in common, that the staff are working off of, that the panelists use to evaluate you, and that you as the applicant know what material needs to come in. So always come back to the guidelines. On this page, this is the guidelines and eligibility tab of our website. The complete criteria as well as the eligibility criteria, these link to the same document. So if you wind up downloading this PDF and tucking it away in your FY27 files, it's the same thing. This eligibility criteria just jumps you straight to that page where we talk about the more detail about how do I know if I'm eligible for this grant. So that's where I'm going to take you now. Now, this looks like a lot. It is like one full page of eligibility criteria. So don't be intimidated. I'll take you through kind of what you need to know here. Also, responding to the eligibility questions in the application will clarify your eligibility. They're presented to you one by one, and if you hit a point where one of your responses make you not eligible, the grant will kind of stop you there and say, you're not eligible. If you think that that's wrong, or you're like, oh, I misclicked, that's when you reach out to me and Kelly, and we'll talk you through it, resetting the application. But these are the things that you need to know. The number one criteria is that you're an organization that has a core mission in the arts, and that you have 501c3 status. If you don't have your independent 501c3 status yet, you can apply with a fiscal sponsor. But please reach out to us early in that process because there are additional steps that need to be taken before your application would be considered complete, namely gathering information from the fiscal sponsor in order to verify, that this is still an eligible application. You also need to have regular activity in a minimum of 4 months or 120 days of the year. You need to present the majority of your activity in Fairfax County, City of Fairfax, or the City of Falls Church. Your organization, so it doesn't need to be 100%. If your organization, you go to DC, you go to Loudoun, that's okay. We're not saying it has to be 100%, it just has to be the majority, 51% or more of your activities in Fairfax County, City of Fairfax, or City of Falls Church. Your organization also needs an address of record within the geographical boundaries of Fairfax County, City of Fairfax, or City of Falls Church. We determined that using a form called the VA Form 102 that determines a physical address for your organization. This is really important when your organization may not have a permanent home. It's like our rehearsal space is not where we receive our mail, for example. So the VA Form 102 is one of the ways that we establish that your organization is established in Fairfax County, City of Fairfax, or City of Falls Church. In addition to that address of record, your organization also needs to meet at least one of the following 3 sub-criteria, which is that you meet, rehearse, exhibit, operate within Fairfax County, however your organization defines those activities, or 51% of your board of directors need to work or reside in City of Fairfax, City of Falls Church, or Fairfax County, or 51% of the attendees or people who engage with your organization need to be from Fairfax County, City of Fairfax, or City of Falls Church. Notice you don't need to meet all 3. Many organizations will, just by the nature of their operations. But this would protect against, for example, let's say the makeup of your board of directors shifted over the last year, and now you've fallen slightly below 51%. You've got people who work in DC, or this person lives in Loudoun County. This person works in Prince William County. Even if your board doesn't meet that, if your organization still meets, rehearses, and exhibits within the county and cities, or if you're able to demonstrate that your audience is coming from there, you're still eligible. So it's just at least one of those 3 sub-criteria for number 4. There are also additional eligibility criteria, being in compliance with local laws, hitting the right sort of reports that you need, whether you're an organization that's required to give an audit or not, You still do need to have financial documents, even if your organization is not required to have an audit, but I'll dig into the financial stuff in a little bit when I talk more about required documents. If you're a previous grantee, you need to have completed your final reports from the previous year. And then you also need to have expenses between five or above, at least above $500,000 when you get into that. Under or over 100,000, that's when we're talking about your small or your medium large organization. Right now, we're looking at the guidelines for the small organization. Some other things to know, I did talk a little bit earlier about organizations that aren't eligible, which are those arts divisions, or people who receive line item funding, divisions of George Mason, departments of George Mason, or nonprofit organizations supporting county agencies. You're also not allowed to use operating support grant funds for fundraising, renovation, political advocacy, debt retirement, proselytizing, regranting. So there's a few things in here if you're concerned about where. So this isn't saying your organization can't do that at all. It's just that the portion of funds that we give you can't be used to support those things. So many organizations have an annual fundraiser. Just operating support funds are not supposed to go to putting that event on, for example. I did want to clarify one point in here because people will sometimes ask me about activities that are not open to the general public. If you're an arts education organization and you work primarily, say, like with Fairfax County schools, your organization is still considered operating with events that are open to the general public. We consider like school age children in the schools, like they're still the general public, even if, John Q. Citizen can't walk in off the street and engage in your K through 12 educational activities or something like that. Um, it's just that would be things that would like be only open to members or like private things. As long as your activity is generally considered open to the public, it's going to be eligible for grant funds. Okay. At some point, I said I was going to talk about matching funds. Or no, grant pass-through funds. I think I might do that now.
I'll jump in for a quick minute because we had a
For sure.
question on that topic. And I just was midway through typing my chat response. So the question was for that on number 3 up top, the organizational eligibility, we're talking about the 51% in the geographic boundary of Fairfax, City of Fairfax and Falls Church. And the answer to that is kind of complicated and sometimes very individual. Because we're serving so many different types of arts organizations and presenting looks like lots of different things, particularly if you're like in an education type of organization. If you're not sure whether your organization is going to hit that benchmark, I would say talk to Nicole and I because we can help you think through what we would feel like is sufficient and what it would, based on how you share the information in your application, what would be sufficient. And then that kind of the second part of the question in the chat was like, hey, I think the organization might meet this for next year for FY27, but not in FY26. And to that end, I would say the eligibility is really asking about what did you do in your most recently completed fiscal year? It's not asking you to offer a guess for the coming year. So the two things to consider with that question are, yeah, you're supposed to answer for your most recently completed actually what happened. But if you're not sure what that 51% looks like, because again, I can't say the same thing necessarily for an art gallery that would apply to a performing ensemble just because they function very differently. Please talk to Nicole and I about what that might look like and whether you qualify.
Great. Thanks so much, Kelly.
Thanks. I'm putting that in the chat just to reference too.
Oh, thank you.
And then only because you said it while you were looking for the other thing, I will add this grant does not have a match. Neither does our project support grant. So if you're looking for that in the guidelines, you won't see it because we do not have a match requirement.
That is true. We do not have a match requirement.
Awesome.
I have just lost my spot.
I know, I totally distracted you. I'm sorry. We were
No, that's okay.
about to talk through pass-through funds.
That's right. Thank you. Okay. And I did touch on this a little bit earlier about pass-through funds, and the financial table that I showed in the required downloads does have an explanation or an example about how to render pass-through money. But here's a few of the kind of common examples that we see. So pass-through money is essentially money that is collected by the organization and then more or less immediately dispersed. This means that this should not show up as income or expenses. The sort of sum, what would I say? Um, After like the income and expense element of the pass-through money has been balanced out, whether your organization incurred an expense or received a profit, that is the piece of information that goes into the financial table. So the example that I gave Kimberly was about like funds collected by an organization that sell art and then distribute that money to the individual artist. You might retain a small commission. It doesn't show as a large expense and then a slightly like smaller income or slightly larger income. It would show just the element of the income. An example where an organization might show an expense, like uh, my organization is buying t-shirts for everyone who's participating. They cost $15, but I'm only asking people to give me 10. So each of the $5 additional expense that my organization is showing for the sale of those t-shirts would show up as just that $5 expense, not, like a $15 income and then a $10 payout or something, or $10 income and a $15 payout. You're reducing it only to the sort of net income or expense related to those pass-through funds. If you have questions about whether something is considered pass-through funds, does your organization have concessions or sell t-shirts? Do you sell ornaments as a fundraiser? Does your organization travel and your organization sort of acts as the point of contact for a travel company? You're collecting money for the people in your organization who are traveling, but those individuals are not giving that money directly to a travel agent. There's some examples that have come up lately that I can think of. But again, if you have questions, you're like, I'm not sure if this is pass-through money, or did I render this pass-through money correctly? Reach out to me and Kelly. We can look at your financial table and talk you through what's showing there, what we understand from that to see it, if that's coming out correctly. And this is also a really good moment for, I know that a lot of financial stuff is sometimes handled by people in the organization who aren't the same person completing the grant. So make sure that if you do need to collaborate with people in your organization on financial elements, that they see the whole application, so that you're not like just giving them tables or charts to fill out, or hey, I need this number. They can get a little bit more full context. And also that you as the grant writer could understand the numbers that a financial person is sending you, making sure that they match the narrative maybe that you're writing about the financials table or something like that. So make sure you're sending this info session, these guidelines, even the questions in the application. Share those widely with anyone in your organization who's collaborating with you, even if they're responsible for only a small part of the application. Okay. And I did mention already that your audit is determined by the level of your organization's income, whereas your budget level of small or medium large is determined by eligible expenses. So I'll just reiterate that. Oh, I see a chat. Let me see. Question about, okay, Maria, that might be, I might need a little bit more detail from you. Her question is, we have 2 performances a year, we sell concessions at them. Untangling income and expenses from that performance versus which part of the concessions may or may not be considered pass-through money. That might be a conversation that would be good for us to have with some of the more specific details of your organization at hand. So that would be a great time to send me an email or pick up the phone and be like, hey, do you have a minute to chat? I always have a minute to chat. That's why I'm here. So you're never bugging me to pick up the phone or to send me an email and ask me these sorts of questions. So yeah, Maria, I would just say like that's a great example of a question where it'd be good to have some one-on-one time with me or Kelly so we can help untangle some of those for you. Because yeah, how it is classed is going to depend from organization to organization. Okay. Next, I'm going to jump to the evaluation criteria. I'm going to spend a bit of time on this and then also some of the required documents as well. So, and again, I know this, I'm showing you the PDF of our guidelines. It looks like a lot. I'm just trying to chunk it up into bits so we can focus on some of the relevant stuff. But this document is here for you to look at and reference, ask us questions about what you find in it, if anything is confusing or you're not sure how it applies to you. I'm jumping to these evaluation criteria here. The small and the medium and large operating support grants share the same 5 major evaluation criteria. So that's your organization profile, your programs and services, your community engagement, your organizational effectiveness, and your financials information. The small and the medium and large grants do have different sub-criteria. I'll see if I can hop over later in this presentation and show you the medium and large application or criteria. But for example, under number 2, programs and services, the small organization have 2 sub-criteria. I think the medium and large organization has like 6 or 7. So they have more questions to answer because each of these sub-criteria and the questions in these sections connect directly to questions that are in the application. So if you find yourself stuck answering a question in the application, return to some of these prompts because the sub-criteria often ask us questions. These are the questions that the panelists are looking at when they're evaluating an application. So you can imagine to yourself, what would I want a panelist to know about my organization if they're trying to answer this question about me? What information would I need to give them? That can sometimes get you unstuck if you're not sure how to respond to a question in the application. But I wanted to emphasize too that these evaluation criteria are the only qualities that panelists are using to evaluate each application. Applications are reviewed on their own merit, and only the information contained in the application can be used in the evaluation. Neither myself nor any of the panelists could pipe up and say, actually, I've seen that group and I know about them. If it's not in the application, it is not up for evaluation in this application. So make sure that anything that a panelist needs to know about your organization is clearly explained in the questions responded to each of these evaluation criteria. When it comes to programs and services as well, I wanted to flag this because it is connected to one of our 2 required download tables. We have the financials table that I've mentioned already. We also have a program and activities table. So there are 2 places in the application where you can talk about your planned program and activities for FY27. One is that program and activities table. This is meant to be a very general and almost bare bones description of what your organization is getting up to. You basically sort your activities into category by type. We think we're going to have 30 rehearsals. We think we're going to have 4 performances. We think we're going to have 5 workshops or community engagement things. You're just putting them into the big buckets of activities. Then there's a narrative question about your planned program and activities for FY27. This is where you can be really detail-oriented and discursive. I'm having 4 performances. I think that the repertoire for those performances in the fall, it's going to be this. In the spring, it's going to be that. That's where you can get into a little bit more detail about the emerging vision for your FY27 activities. The table, bare bones, the narrative, give me the detail. You can talk about programming, marketing, anything like that. But consider the table to be something that is a little bit more sorting things into categories or types, and then you can get way more detail oriented in the narrative response. But if you have any questions as you're filling that out, again, reach out to me and Kelly at any time in the application process. Let's see. The next thing I want to show you in the guidelines is the terms and conditions of the grant. So if you do receive a grant, these are the rules that we're going to hold you to. Some of them are pretty straightforward, that grant activities occur within a certain point, that your organization needs to be eligible throughout the grant period. If you have any significant changes to your finances, to your leadership, or to your programming throughout the grant period, you should let us know. And these can be both successes and challenges. A major financial change might be, we received a $15,000 NEA grant. Who knows if that'll happen again, but you never know. Or it could be a change like our board of directors president has had a personal emergency and has had to step away, or a significant staff member has left. Changes like that, just so that we know what's happening in your organization and if there are ways that we can help support you. That's one thing we're definitely interested in. Let me see here. Terms and conditions. I'm gonna just kind of scroll through all this a little bit. There we go. One thing to know is if you do receive a grant, whether that's ticket and participation subsidy, project support, or what are we doing here? Operating support. You do need to find a way to acknowledge this funding. We know that we're part of a constellation of people who are supporting you, but we do have some specific ways to credit ArtsFairfax's support. There's funding acknowledgement instructions on our website. There's also graphics that you can download, whether it's our logo. We have a fun little badge that says, "I'm an ArtsFairfax grantee," that looks so good on social media and online. Little graphics you can put into your program if you do printed or virtual programs, and all different sorts of guidelines like that. So if you are successfully receiving a grant, make sure you return to that funding acknowledgement page to ensure that you're in compliance with your grant acknowledgement. Same thing goes for having an Arts Directory profile and listing your events on the ArtsFairfax calendar. Another thing to know about the operating support grant is that if you do receive a grant, when you receive the award announcement in August 2026, at that point you will receive 70% of the total award amount that's going to your organization. Then you go through your grant period, and the final 30% of that grant award is awarded after successful completion of the final report. So do be aware that that final payment for your FY27 grant does technically come about 2 months after the end of the FY27 fiscal year. If your organization runs on a fiscal year that is aligned with the grant, it does mean that some of that payment is going to trickle over into fiscal year 28. Okay. I talked about acknowledgements. Oh, the last thing I wanted to draw attention to is appeals. The funding decisions of ArtsFairfax and the board of directors are final. However, if you believe that your funding decision was impacted by, for example, your grant was evaluated based on criteria that are based on something that are not the criteria. There was an undisclosed conflict of interest on the panel, that you believe that the panelists overlooked really significant parts of the application, that they were like, well, I wish I knew anything about the finances, but there was nothing there, even if there were documents that were uploaded. If you find that this is happening as you're listening to the evaluation or when you receive the award, there is an appeals process that is available to you, but this must be initiated within 30 days of the award announcement. So you would file a written appeal request directly to ArtsFairfax, and that would be to me and to Kelly, so that we can begin that process if you believe that's happening. Okay. That's the appeals process. Now, okay, I'm almost done yapping. I promise I'm going to have lots of time for questions in a minute here. But I wanted to take you through some of the required documentation. This is a pretty deep dive, but I think it's worth it sometimes to step through some of these documents because I find people have questions about them. So these are the documents on this page, or on page 13 of this small grant criteria for you here. This is a list of documents that you're going to be asked to upload as attachments to either the organization profile or to the grant application itself. A reminder that that organization profile for grant applicants is a 4-month submittable. Just like Tina pointed out, 2 submissions. You need your organization profile and either your small or your medium and large operating support application. If you do request to edit your previous organization profile instead of start a new one, I'll say it again, make sure you carefully review places where there are now blank responses, such as your most recently completed fiscal year income and expense, or places that might not be blank, but your organization needs to update. For example, the number of employees or volunteers that engaged with your organization in the previous fiscal year. So even if you're updating an existing org profile, scan that whole document and scan that whole form and make sure that all the information is correct and up to date. We'll also ask you for your organization's IRS letter of determination. This is usually a letter It could be very old. I love seeing the super old ones. That's really fun. But this document shows at least the confirmation that your organization has a 501c3 status, and it also shows your organization's EIN. This is one of those moments that if you're applying with a fiscal sponsor because your organization doesn't have 501c3 status, then we're actually asking for your fiscal sponsor's IRS letter of determination, which is why if you're thinking of applying with a fiscal sponsor, talk to Kelly and I early so we can begin that process and initiate gathering those documents, not only from you, but from your sponsor. We'll also ask you for the IRS Form 990. This is your organization's tax filing form. This could be an IRS Form 990. It may also be something called a 990EZ or possibly 990N, which is also known as a postcard 990 if your organization has an income below $60,000. When you upload that, one question we will ask you about is the tax year date on that form, which is a bold black number in the top corner of the form. So that's just something, especially if you don't read a lot of financial documents and you're responsible for answering that question, that's what we're asking you, looking for that bold number of the year in the top corner of that form. The next required document is your VA 102. I was talking about that a little bit earlier. This is how we determine your organization's location for eligibility in a standardized way, especially if your organization doesn't have a permanent space. Some organizations have an office, or their rehearsal space is a place that they own and they can receive mail at, or they rent and can receive mail at. Many other organizations have a dispersed office. Many people or volunteers work remotely, and you may receive mail at a PO box or something like that. The VA 102 is one way we establish the physical address of your organization. Usually that's where your records might be kept. So if your organization's president or treasurer is responsible for that, it's going to be their home address. And that determines that eligibility for being in Fairfax County, City of Fairfax, or City of Falls Church. Again, if you have questions about that, please reach out to Kelly and I, and we can help you navigate that form. Another question that we ask you is for a list of board members. This is distinct from the staff and board officer bios. This is just a list of your board members and where they live and or work. And highlight for us, whether it's an asterisk or a color highlight, some way that calls out the people who live or work in Fairfax County, City of Fairfax, and City of Falls Church. Because remember, this connects directly to one of those ways we're determining that eligibility. One of those 3 criteria you have to fulfill about your board being 51% or more based in Fairfax County, whether that's live or work. So that's one of the things that we'll ask you for as a required document. We'll also ask you for your treasurer's report or your audit. I've talked a little bit about the audit and when that's required. And again, the opinion audit is only required for organizations with an income in excess of $1 million for 2 previous consecutive fiscal years. For the majority of organizations, a treasurer's report is the most appropriate thing to upload. Treasurer's reports don't need to be signed or approved by the board or anything like that, but it could be the thing that the board might receive from the treasurer at a regular meeting of your organization. You might expect it to include things like the current fiscal year's budget, the year-to-date actuals of income and expenses, a balance sheet that reflects your organization's current assets and liabilities, or maybe a profit and loss or income statement that shows the records of revenue and expenses for the most recently completed fiscal year. This is also distinct from the financials table we ask you to submit. Your treasurer's report and those documents show us the way your organization manages its finances. If you use like QuickBooks, like all those categories and subcategories for how you classify expenses and income, your organization telling its financial story in its native language. The financials table is a little bit more formulaic. We ask you might find yourself combining categories in order to answer a question in the financials table. That also asks for a 3 fiscal year period. The financials table looks at your most recently completed fiscal year actual income and expense, looks at your current fiscal year's budget, and it asks you about the upcoming or grant year fiscal year budget. This is not, it does not need to be a board approved budget. It may not even be possible to have that in, March or April. Your board may not be voting on that budget until later in the year, but a realistic and reasonable budget that, you feel comfortable sharing as far as like what you think your your grant year income or expenses might look like is part of that table. And this is in a standardized format that allows panelists to understand financials in a uniform way across all of the applications they might review. They're not comparing applications to each other, but having a standard way of looking at operations can help the panelists make sense of all the different numbers that they're seeing. We'll also ask you for brief biographies of key staff members and board officers. About a paragraph is fine, but those paragraphs should focus on, what those people bring to the board or bring to the table as a board member or staff member, key qualifications, skills, or experiences that make them a valuable part of your organization's team. And then the last thing I want to touch on is these work samples and supplemental materials. It's fun, but it's also sometimes a challenging way to tell that story. So here's some advice that I have for you. Make sure that your work samples and supplemental materials are recent and they show your organization in the best light or at their very best. Um, I am not a lawyer, but I will advise that when it comes to submitting work samples, sometimes applicants come to me and they're like, oh, I have such a good recording of this show that we did, or this performance that we did, but I can't share it because it's copyright. My perspective is that you can. This falls into fair use doctrine. It is a not-for-profit usage. It's not going to be public. The only people that see it, if you're hosting it on a private or unlisted YouTube link, the only people that would see it would be me, Kelly, and the panelists reviewing your application. Also, for especially theatrical works, dance, or music, with only 5 total minutes available for panel viewing across the work samples and the supplemental materials, you're also likely falling below that threshold of a significant portion of a work. So there's a lot of ways that I would argue that sharing the very best that you have available for your group, I wouldn't worry about copyright. I believe strongly that the work samples fall under fair use. So if give us the best stuff that you have, show your organization in its very, very best light. Also, when it comes to supplemental materials, so beyond the work samples, which tend to focus heavily on demonstrating your organization's artistic and aesthetic qualities, supplemental materials speak more to the impact of your organization in the community. In addition to how you promote yourself, consider the power of things like testimonials, critical or press reviews, awards, or any other materials that you have that demonstrate the positive impact that your organization has on its community. Okay. I'm going to stop showing you this giant grants document and encourage you again to go to our website to gather the guidelines for yourself as well. But as I close in on the last bit of our information session, I have a few more things to tell you before we go on to a final Q&A. Does anyone have any questions for me now that I took you through the nitty-gritty of the eligibility criteria and required documents? I did such a good job. And of course, I realize that's a lot to digest while some of you are literally digesting. It's lunchtime. So when you go back and look at these criteria, or when you start to download those questions from the templates and get to work, and you're like, oh, I don't think I actually totally understood what she said there. Again, call me, email me for the next 3 months. I am at your disposal when it comes to completing this grant application. So please don't hesitate. Even there's no question too small or too silly. This is literally why I'm here. I want to help you have the greatest success for this. Okay. Kelly, anything that I've overlooked or anything to chime in?
Nope, I think we're hitting on everything.
Feeling good. All right. Almost done. I've got just a little bit more to share with you. Wanted to give you some insight from some of our panelists and also some advice from the grants staff. When it comes to panelists and how they respond to applications, a lot of the things that they seem to have respond positively to include using data to support your storytelling. You might say something like, our audience has grown so much over the last 2 years. How much? By what measurements? How did you measure that? Putting a little bit more detail. It doesn't need to be like the most granular numbers out to like 6 or 7 decimal places, but tell me how you measured that. Are you using surveys? Are you using ticket, door counts, or things like that? Putting some data and some specificity into a story really helps panelists understand. Like when you say it's growth like we've never seen before, it's like, well, if your organization's really small, it might just be a little bit of growth. But being able to tell that story with data is so important for the panelists to understand. Another thing that is good for an application, if it makes a good case for meeting the unique needs and interests of your community, clearly describe and define the community that you're serving and how you know you're reaching them. That's really impactful for panelists. Demographic data goes hand in hand with that and can be really powerful. Not only the general Fairfax County demographics that we have available on our website, but even samples or representative understanding of surveys about your audience or the people who are engaging with you shows that you understand who you work with and who you work for in the community. When you share details about your organization's strategic priorities, make sure you're connecting those priorities to your mission and to your vision and how you plan to achieve them. If one of your organization's goals is to grow audience, how are you planning to do that? Which audience? Is it just any warm bodies? Are we looking for a particular demographic or a subset of a demographic or community? Things like that. Another thing when it comes to goals and priorities is that panelists are very sensitive to goals that are SMART. If you know the SMART goals acronym, that's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. Not every goal that you express needs to have all 5 of those qualities, but consider defining or refining some of your goals with those qualities. Like if I say I want to grow my audience in the coming year, I might say by how much, or in what period of time, or explain how I plan to do that. So these things that are a little bit more structured than just pie in the sky type goals. And when it comes to finances, panelists are on the lookout for diverse revenue streams. Again, we don't require matching grant funds, but panelists are looking for sustainable and balanced earned and unearned income, whether those are donations or ticket sales, merchandise, anything like that, as well as robust financial engagement from board members. Any board giving is usually pretty good because it means that those board members have literal financial skin in the game for the responsible management of your organization. It's not a requirement, but it is one of those things that looks nice. And making sure that too that your organization's financial management and also the sort of fundraising or income generating streams that you have are appropriate for your organization's size and operational goals. There are a lot of ways that your organization can demonstrate awareness of your community, of your engagement with stakeholders, and things like that. Panelists tend to be really sensitive to programming and your relationship with your community. One thing that I actually heard multiple times in the previous year's panels was, are you working with a community or are you doing something to a community? So if you can show a reciprocal conversation, we do this programming and then we survey our audience to make sure that this is what they want to see and hear. We do focus groups. We do surveys that are sent out to a broader list than people who are attending things. All the different ways that you might make sure that you're staying in touch with the people who you hope are coming in your doors. Another thing I wanted to point out as well is that diversity is a journey for each organization. Parts of that journey may be primarily internal. Some of parts of that journey may be more public facing. But when it comes to discussing your organization's diversity, think of it holistically within the organization's overall operations, but also within the context of your organization's history and mission. What has that journey of diversity or growth and focus on that looked like for your organization historically, and how might it inform current and then future operations? You can discuss that as an element of board leadership diversity, of ensemble diversity, of repertoire, of your audience. There are many different ways to understand your organization's journey in this realm. And now I have some basic tips from the grants staff. I've got them grouped into sort of 3 basic categories. One is process. Start early. Don't wait until the last minute. Even if you're working on those Word docs in that collaborative space, don't be opening submittable for the first time on the morning of April 7th. If there are tech issues, oh, I've got a big video to upload. That sure is taking a long time. You don't want to be starting the upload at 6:30 p.m. when it's due at 7. So start your application early. Don't wait until the last minute to ask questions or gather documents because, God forbid the person who has that document you need is on like a 2 week long safari and they don't have internet. So get started with that stuff as early as you can. When you're working in Submittable, save often. It's supposed to do it automatically, but it doesn't always. So click that save button a lot and log out of Submittable when you're not working. Even if you're just stepping away from your desk and your computer goes to sleep, you could lose progress if you don't save and log out. Just be cautious when you're working in the Submittable. But we do highly recommend if you're collaborating with multiple people in your organization, take advantage of those templates, move that work out of the Submittable space and into a collaborative or cloud space. Like I mentioned, that Submittable does allow collaborators so that multiple individual accounts can access one application. But if y'all are in there working on top of each other, tears and tragedy will occur. So if you're collaborating live, do it in a Word doc or other shared space. It also creates a great record for your organization to have something that duplicates what winds up in Submittable. Use the resources on our website. Check out that Word version of the application, the required tables, any tips and tricks that we have for you. And again, just to reiterate, ArtsFairfax staff, Kelly and I, if you get on the phone with Shannon or even anybody else in our organization, we don't participate in panel discussions. What I know about you stays with me throughout the entire panel discussion. I can't pipe up and be like, oh, actually, they said this. So make sure applications are prepared to stand on their own. When it comes to mechanics, write clearly and concisely. Do your best to keep your responses within or around the word count limits. Other than the mission statement in the org profile, there are no hard word count limits. But panelists are reading a lot of applications, so it's in your best interest to be as precise and straightforward as you can. Avoid using jargon and spell out acronyms the first time you reference them, even stuff like FCPS or GMU. We in Fairfax County know that means Fairfax County Public Schools or George Mason University, but sometimes we have panelists from outside the county who may not be so savvy to some of these organizations that are working within our county or the acronyms and what they mean. So always spell them out. Check your narrative and to other texts for grammar and spelling errors. It can be really helpful to have someone who isn't working on the application at all give a final read over what you said to make sure that you're explaining things clearly and not repeating too much. Also, verify that contact information, bank details, phone numbers, all that stuff is up to date, especially in that organization profile if some of that stuff needs updating. And the financial information that you refer to in your application, especially in your narrative, make sure that matches the numbers in the financial table. When a panelist is looking at it and you say, we made this much money in the narrative, but then the table shows a different number, they're not sure which one is the right one. And the confusion is just generally not a good thing. And lastly, when it comes to writing for the panel, avoid using jargon and don't assume that the people who are reading your application know your organization or programs. In addition to not being able to take outside information into the panel moment, panelists have a variety of backgrounds and expertise and might not be as familiar as what business as usual looks like for your discipline, or for like artistic values. Like if my background is in visual art, there may be parts of the world of dance that are a little opaque to me. So do your best to explain things without being too technical or just, as we all know, because panelists they may have arts expertise, but maybe not specific detail or knowledge about your discipline. And so when a reader's finished reviewing your application, they should be able to understand your organization, mission, and programs pretty well. Use data to back up those stories. It really enriches how people are able to understand the awesome anecdotes and those moments that we love as arts organizations. A little data goes a long way. And make sure you're referring to those evaluation criteria, especially if you find yourself repeating yourself or stuck on how to answer a question. Go back to those sub-criteria and think, am I missing anything? Or if someone had just met my organization today, what would they need to know? Okay. Final notes for you before we go into our last little bit where I can take some more questions. Again, that 7 p.m. deadline is absolute. There are no exceptions. We will also have 2 in-person working sessions in March. One is going to be focused on finances, the financial table, all those parts of the application, and the other is going to be focused more on narrative. These working sessions are a moment for you to meet in person with Kelly and I, with your application, your materials in hand, or your previous year's materials, and we can work on like the question Maria had. My specific organization's information, how does it fit into this? So keep an eye out for sign up for that information or those working sessions soon. If you need accommodations or translations for the application, reach out early, at least 2 weeks in advance of the deadline, and contact us anytime with questions. I think that's only the sixth or seventh time I said that today, so it's pretty good. Putting this QR code for the newsletters up here as well. Highly recommend people engaging with the newsletters. We don't spam you. We just send, it's basically like every, I think, bi-weekly newsletters. And you may even find your organization's events featured in those if they're on the calendar. Okay, I think I'm done talking to you all now. So now I can answer questions. We have 6 minutes. That's not so bad. But if anybody has any questions, then they could be, we could go back to things more specific.
And while you're thinking, I'll add, you did a great job of talking about some of the little traps of Submittable, which in general is a good platform. There's just things we want you to know when you're working on that application. One thing that you'll see once this session is updated on our website, there will be a link to a separate shorter video that kind of takes a broader look at Submittable and talks you through like maybe what you might want to consider as you use that platform. So that has a little deeper dive and that will be available next week too.
Yeah. Thank you, Kelly.
Hey, everybody.
Any questions? Oh,
I have
yes,
a
Kimberly, go
question.
for it.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. I appreciate all this information. I have three yes or no questions. The first one being, so you guys have the operation supports and you have the project support. Can an organization only apply for one of those?
No.
Okay.
So you could apply for and successfully receive both operating and project support in the same fiscal year. There's no restriction on those two grants.
Okay, great. Thank you. Um, Will we be receiving feedback on our application after you've decided, or is our best bet to watch the panel discussion to get like feedback on the application itself?
Sure. Definitely tune in if you're available. Highly recommend. Just that discussion can be so illuminating, but the staff does prepare condensed and summarized and anonymized comments on your application. So when you receive your notification in August 2026, you'll get a letter about your grant. And then another thing that we do attach to that is feedback from the panelists. And so it'll be like, application strengths and weaknesses. Like this is a part of the application that hit so good. I love this financial narrative. It really helped me understand this table. Or I wish that the work samples had shown a performance instead of a still photo or something like that. Like things that are like sort of influencing the panelists' evaluation of the different criteria category. And things that you, as you apply for future grant applications, might be able to look for both things that you're doing well and to keep doing, but also possible room for improvement. So you will
Mhm.
receive that feedback as well, even if you
Okay.
don't are not able to attend the panel review.
And even if you don't get awarded,
Correct.
or is okay, that's for everybody.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yes,
Okay,
that's for everyone. Mhm.
great. Awesome. And then my last question is, so I saw about the work samples. It said 5 minutes total across all work samples. Is that right? And
Yes.
so could we upload just one 5 minute video that includes at least three different events or things, something like that, where so you're just watching one video that includes multiple samples of our work instead of submitting
Three
three
little
separate
clips.
files?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
would
if
that
you have a
bounce
good
out
like
in any way in the application
yes,
or?
yeah, that's totally I've seen people do that before where it's like we have the 5 minute reel that shows three
Yes.
samples.
Yeah.
Some organizations they are like, I don't have time for that. Watch minute 2 through minute
Right. Yeah.
3:30
Okay.
of this video. So however you want to describe it, because you do have the opportunity also to include a cover letter or an
Okay.
explanation. So you might say like, here's one 5 minute clip. From 0 to 1:30, you're seeing this performance. From
Gotcha.
1:31 to
Okay.
2:30, you're seeing this. So you can
Excellent.
explain what's going on without having to upload, separate files. So it's
Okay.
not going to say like,
Yeah.
oh, you only uploaded one, it's not complete yet. It's up to 3 different examples.
Okay, fantastic. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Sure. And on the topic of work samples, we have the question in the chat about, do work samples need to take place in Fairfax, Virginia? I think Kelly's response of no, not necessarily is a good one. Yeah,
Yeah. And
if
so,
you've
I
got a
mean,
really good performance from ACB and it was in Baltimore this year, like, okay, like you kind of gotta go where the heat is.
I think one thing that comes up frequently with the work samples is if they start to feel like they don't represent the work that the panel just read about, then it feels sort of dissonant, and the panel sometimes does not know what to make of that. So of course, one thing we do know is there's a real lack of venues in Fairfax County. So, like in particular, we see a lot of people at Rachel Schlesinger Concert Hall in Alexandria, which is like a quarter of a mile outside of Fairfax County. I don't think anybody is going to bat an eye at that. But if you have like your three samples are out of state for some reason, which would be pretty unusual to start with, I think that you would get comments from the panel that are like, well, what do you do locally? How is this work affecting the community? Or like, how does that sort of tie in? So, no, it's not a hard requirement that it be here, but those are some things you might want to consider when you look for your samples.
Yeah. Any other questions I can answer? Well, it is 1:30. You've spent 90 minutes of a Tuesday with me. Thank you. I really appreciate your time today. Um, Again, this video recording will be made available on our website in about a week. So keep an eye out for that. Share it widely with anyone in your organization who's working with you. We also have an abridged info session tomorrow. So we're not going to get as deep in the details of the guidelines of the documents as we did today. Kind of a little bit more of a quick hit overview. Oh, thanks, Kimberly. Yeah, I love my timing. Um, so if anyone in your organization has FOMO and wants to see this tomorrow, tell them to come on down. They can register for this. That's still open until tomorrow afternoon. But otherwise, these materials are available on our website. Talk to me early and often. I am here for you. Like people say, like I don't want to bother you. It's not bothering. Why do you think I sit at my desk all day? I am ready for phone conversations, for emails. Send me documents, ask me questions. I'm here to make this process as painless as it can be for you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Of
Appreciate
course.
it.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate the time today.
Take care.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Can't wait to read those applications.